After being tormented by a nightmare that prevents him from sleeping, a young man finds himself trapped in a dark forest where he faces a mysterious and terrifying figure, a woman with sharp claws who feeds on his fears and insecurities. With each encounter, the shadows of his past emerge, revealing traumas and pains that he tried to bury. Determined to escape this psychological prison, he discovers that the real battle is not against the creature, but against his own weaknesses. As the fight intensifies, he finds the strength within himself to confront not only the woman, but also the demons that haunt his mind. In a thrilling climax, he learns that darkness can never be completely eradicated, but it can be mastered. Now, arming himself with courage and determination, he prepares to leave the forest, transforming his nightmare into a journey of self-discovery and resilience. This intense and emotional story immerses the reader in a universe of psychological terror, while exploring the internal struggle between light and darkness, revealing that true freedom comes from facing one's own fears. I never thought that something as simple as a good night's sleep could become such a torment. What began as an innocent dream turned into a nightmare that would haunt me for weeks, leaving me exhausted and terrified. It was a rainy night, the kind of night that makes the wind howl and shadows dance on the walls. I was at home, snuggled in my blanket, when I fell asleep. At first, everything seemed normal. I dreamed that I was in a dense forest, shrouded in fog. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the air were permeated with a dark mystery. But soon, something changed. A presence approached. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes boring into me, as if watching me with an insatiable hunger. My heart began to race. I tried to run, but the ground beneath my feet felt sticky, pulling me down. Fear seeped into my bones, and in the darkness, a laugh echoed, low and distorted, like an evil whisper that spread through the forest. I woke up with a start, breathing heavily. It was just a dream, I thought, trying to calm my heart. But the feeling that something was wrong persisted. Over the next few days, the forest haunted me again. Each night, the nightmare intensified. I saw the same figure, indistinct, always following me, always closer. The laughter became louder and louder, an echo that followed me into every corner of my mind. Over time, the nights became an endless cycle of terror. In a moment of weakness, I decided to research dreams and nightmares. I discovered that nightmares are often a reflection of our deepest fears. What was I running away from? What did the figure in the forest represent? But the more I thought, the more confused and terrified I felt. Fear was now a constant specter in my life. By the night of the 15th day, I was completely exhausted. Exhaustion enveloped me like a heavy cloak, but terror kept me awake. Once more, I closed my eyes, hoping that perhaps this time I could escape. But instead, the forest reappeared, darker than ever. And to my horror, the figure that had been chasing me was no longer indistinct. Now, it stood before me clearly. It was a woman with empty eyes and a smile that seemed to stretch too far, as if her mouth was not made for such an expression. Fear gripped my chest like a cold claw. "You called me," she whispered, and the laughter returned, reverberating through the forest. I despaired. What did she want from me? As I tried to run away, I realized that I was trapped in this nightmare, which had become real. Every step I took was in vain. The forest grew denser, and the figure came closer. With each laugh, the emptiness inside me grew, as if something was feeding on my fear. I woke up again, or at least I thought I had. What I didn't know was that tonight would be different. The terror I had experienced in the forest was now in my own home. My bedroom door creaked, and the laughter echoed again, not just in my mind, but in my space, as if the darkness itself were manifesting itself. I was no longer safe, and for the first time, I realized that the nightmare was not just a dream. It was a warning. With my body shaking and my mind reeling, I asked myself, how could I escape this nightmare? The answer was right in front of me, but the truth was that it was far beyond my reach. The bitter cold enveloped me like a sheet of ice as her laughter echoed off the walls of my room. I stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to look away from the slowly opening door. The darkness creeping and seemed to have a life of its own, as if trying to swallow me. And for a moment, I wished it was all just a nightmare. But the truth was right in front of me. The woman's figure was now fully visible, her empty eyes and grotesque smile seeming to glow in the darkness. "You cannot escape me," she whispered, each word like a thread of poison that wormed its way into my mind. "You called me, and now I am here." The air around me seemed to tighten, and I knew without a doubt that she was no mere creation of my fears. She was real. Desperately, I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as if terror itself had trapped me. Every attempt to scream seemed to be lost in a silent void, as if the house itself were absorbing my despair. I looked around, searching for any escape, but the shadows seemed to dance around me, increasing the dread that gripped my heart. And then the woman took a step forward. The smell of mold and decay invaded my nose, making me feel sick. "Do you think you can leave me?" she asked, and her laughter became a deep echo that reverberated off the walls. "You brought me here, and now I am part of you." With a surge of courage, I finally managed to move, jumping out of bed and running to the door. But as soon as I opened it, I found only the darkness of the hallway, as if the house itself were trying to keep me trapped. My heart was pounding out of control, and a surge of adrenaline pushed me forward. I ran through the halls, but the woman was always behind me, her laughter echoing like a beacon of despair. "You can't run," she screamed, and her tone was infused with evil pleasure. Every curve, every shadow seemed to have a life of its own, distorting my perception of reality. I was trapped in a maze of nightmares, unsure if I was truly awake or if it was all just an illusion. The house was filled with whispers, echoes of memories and fears. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the shadows became familiar figures, distorting into faces I knew and loved. "Why don't you love me?" a familiar voice whispered, and I almost fell to my knees. Panic took over me, as the familiar faces became more and more distorted, as if they were being consumed by the darkness itself. I needed to find a way out, but the terror was so intense that the walls seemed to move, disorienting me with each passing second. I tried to force positive thoughts, to remember who I was before all this began. The figure of the woman was becoming more oppressive. Each step I took towards freedom was accompanied by the feeling that something was feeding on my fear. Eventually, I reached an old mirror in a dark corner of the hallway. It was fogged up, and when I looked at my reflection, I saw the woman behind me. Her empty eyes stared into the back of my head, her twisted smile reflecting the horror I was living. And in that instant, I realized that I was not just a bystander. I was the protagonist of my own nightmare. Through the mirror, reality was distorting, and something began to snap inside me. "You can't escape," the woman whispered, and the world around me began to crumble. The laughter became a cacophony, and the house shook under the weight of my desolation. But I had to fight. With desperate determination, I realized that to overcome this nightmare, I had to confront my deepest fears. What had been hidden in my subconscious needed to be exposed to the light of truth. With a fierce scream, I looked into the woman's eyes and said, "You don't control me. I am stronger than you." At that moment, the echoing laughter stopped. Silence fell, and the house seemed to hesitate. What would happen next? I was about to find out if I could get my life back, and with it, my peace. If you're enjoying this horror story and want to know what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. The silence that followed my scream was deafening. The woman's figure hesitated for a brief moment, as if trying to understand the force I had summoned. Her empty eyes seemed to glow, reflecting a mix of surprise and anger. And before I could breathe a sigh of relief, she advanced towards me with supernatural speed. "You dare to defy me?" Her voice sounded like thunder, reverberating through the walls of the house. In an instant, the atmosphere became dense, the air charged with a palpable electricity. I stepped back, my feet slipping on the polished wood of the floor. Reality around me began to distort again, and I found myself surrounded by shadows that crept in as if the house itself were conspiring against me. Desperately, I was pushed into the hallway, where the whispers grew louder, enveloping me like a storm. The voices were familiar, but distorted, like echoes of a past I did not want to face. "You are not worthy," one of them said. "You are weak, as you have always been." Despair tore at my heart. Those words were embedded in my mind like poison. The woman was close, her smile turning into a look of triumph. "I am part of you," she declared, and her hands reached out toward me, fingers turning into claws. "You cannot deny me." I fought the paralyzed feeling that threatened to overwhelm my body. The urge to run took over me, and as soon as I turned, I ran down the hallway. The exit door was farther away than I remembered, and with every step, it felt like the walls were moving to trap me. Every shadow became a hand trying to pull me back, an invisible force trying to keep me there, trapped in the nightmare. The house was alive, pulsing in response to my fear. The ground beneath my feet began to disintegrate, as if I were running over a collapsing canyon. And at the end of the hallway, I saw the light of the exit door flashing like a distant beacon. "No!" I screamed, forcing my body to go faster. The woman was right behind me, her footsteps heavy as a drum, each beat echoing in my heart. By the time I reached the door, my body was on fire with adrenaline. I pushed it with all my strength, and in a moment of pure tension, I managed to open it. The cool night air enveloped me, but freedom was only an illusion. As soon as I stepped through the door, the scene changed. I was no longer in my home. I was back in the forest, surrounded by the same fog that had trapped me so many times. Panic took hold of me. "What's happening?" I screamed, but all I got was the disturbing laughter that reverberated through the trees. The woman appeared in front of me, now with an even more grotesque appearance, her claws extended towards me. "You cannot escape your destiny," she said, and the forest seemed to contract around me, the trees twisting and writhing as if feeding on my anguish. I tried to run, but the earth beneath my feet turned to mud, pulling me down. Fear turned to despair as I realized this wasn't just a dream. It was a trap. The shadows of the forest danced, forming familiar figures that watched me with empty eyes, as if waiting for something. "You don't belong in this world," a voice echoed, and a wave of dread coursed through me. The ground began to shake, and a fissure opened before me, revealing an even deeper darkness. The laughter intensified, becoming a symphony of despair and pain. I was about to be consumed, swallowed by something I couldn't comprehend. "You called me," the woman whispered once more, this time very close to me. "And I am here to stay." In a last-ditch effort, I screamed with all my might, defying the darkness that surrounded me. "I am not yours." The words reverberated through the air, and for a moment, the light of hope shone within me. The laughter began to fade, and the woman's figure wavered, as if reality were being distorted again. But before I could take advantage of her weakness, a strong wind blew through the forest, lifting the mist and revealing an exit. Dread still clung to me, but something inside me was awakening, a light against the darkness that I had not noticed before. "I am stronger than you think," I told myself, and with that, I prepared myself for the final battle. The biting wind brought a mixture of relief and fear, as if the forest itself were watching our fight. As the mist cleared around me, the woman's figure was closer than ever, her blank gaze now filled with a growing fury. "You think you can defy me?" she growled, her voice echoing through the forest like the wail of lost souls. Each word felt like a blow, trying to bring me down. As the darkness gathered around me, I knew I had to find a weak spot in her power. "You are not real," I screamed, trying to summon every shred of courage I had left. "You are but the reflection of my fears." But her sharp claws were growing ever closer, as if they wanted to tear at the very essence of who I was. The forest around me began to change. The once familiar trees now seemed to close in on me, their trunks twisting into menacing shapes. Every leaf whispered my deepest secrets, and the moonlight seemed to fade, plunging everything into suffocating darkness. I was surrounded by my own insecurities, and each shadow felt like a terrifying memory emerging from the darkness. "You are a failure," the woman screamed, and the intensity of her words hit me like a shockwave. Images from my life began to overlay the scene, moments of shame and pain, memories of lost opportunities and shattered dreams. "No one will ever save you," a distant voice whispered, and dread threatened to consume what little bravery I had mustered. The pressure increased, and I felt the earth vibrate beneath my feet, as if nature itself were revolting. "I am not you," I screamed again, anger rising within me. With an unexpected movement, I raised my arms, as if trying to break free from an invisible spell. "I am more than this." Determination burned in my heart, and I realized that my strength lay within me, not in any shadows from the past. The woman hesitated, her smile fading, but the darkness did not retreat. "You cannot defeat me," she hissed, and with that, the shadows began to gather around her, forming an army of familiar faces, figures from my past. "Look at them," she pointed with one claw. "They are here because of you." The sight paralyzed me. Every face I had loved, every friend I had lost, now appeared as a sad, vague shadow. Terror turned to sharp pain, and I realized that I was fighting not just her, but every part of me that had succumbed to the darkness. "You are making me weak," I screamed, feeling tears stream down my face. "But I will not give up." I looked at the shadows, my friends and loves, and a wave of love and longing washed over me. "I cannot let them go. I cannot let you win." The echo of my determination reverberated through the forest, and the woman began to writhe. The shadows surrounding her seemed to waver, as if their strength were fading. "What are you doing?" she screamed, her voice now tinged with panic. "You cannot defeat me." With every word I spoke, every memory I held on to, the darkness began to dissipate. "I am stronger than my fears. I am stronger than you." A bright light began to emanate from me, an energy that defied the night itself. The woman tried to advance, but was being repelled by the force of what I had discovered. The ground shook and the trees twisted, but the light was now unbearable, illuminating every corner of the forest. And then, with a scream of pure strength and determination, I released everything inside me. "I am free," the declaration echoed through the darkness, and the brightness spread as if a burst of sunlight had appeared in the middle of the night. The woman's figure began to fade, her outlines darkening, and a maniacal laugh turned into an agonized scream. "You cannot leave me." But his words no longer held power over me. The light consumed everything around me, and I knew that I was finally taking control. And so, as the darkness faded, I fell to my knees, panting and exhausted, but at the same time free. The forest was changing, and I knew that I had won the battle. But what was yet to come? Was the fight truly over? The light that emanated from me began to dim, but the feeling of freedom still pulsed within me. The shadows that had once imprisoned me now dissipated like smoke in the wind, and the forest seemed to regain its original essence. The trees, which had once twisted into menacing shapes, now stood majestically, and the whispers of pain were replaced by soft murmurs of hope. But victory did not come without a price. I was still in shock, the exhaustion weighing me down like an unbearable burden. As the last trace of the woman's figure faded into the night breeze, a wave of sadness enveloped me. I knew that this battle had been won, but the internal war continued. Each shadow that had emerged represented not only a fear, but a part of myself that I had stifled for so long. Standing amidst the rebirth of the forest, I realized that I had a new purpose. The darkness could never be completely eradicated. It would always exist, like an echo of my insecurities. However, I now had the power to face it, to remember that each fear is a part of who we are, but it does not define who we will be. Looking around, I saw that the forest, now illuminated by the moonlight, was no longer a place of despair, but a symbol of resilience. The trees seemed to smile at me, and the sounds of nature were like a song of victory. I am stronger, I whispered to myself, a new determination filling my heart. So, with hesitant steps, I began to walk out of the forest. The feel of each leaf beneath my feet was a reminder that I had been through something immense. What happened to me was not in vain, I thought, as daylight began to break on the horizon. The transition from dark to light symbolized not only a new morning, but a new life. And as I left the forest behind, a part of me knew that the struggle was not over yet. Each day would bring new challenges, and the darkness would always be lurking, waiting to test me again. But now, armed with the experience of battle and the certainty that light can always win, I was ready. I reached the edge of the road, the sun beginning to illuminate the world around me. I looked back one last time, thanking the forest for its lesson. With a deep sigh, I moved forward, determined to live life to the fullest, knowing that, although fear might come, I would no longer be a prisoner. I was the master of my own story. And so, with the sunlight warming my face, a new chapter began. Each step I took was an act of courage, an affirmation that life is worth living, even with its shadows. After all, I had learned that facing one's demons is the true essence of freedom.